The Philippines beat its ASEAN neighbors with 24% in foreign direct investments in 2013. But that number is deceiving. When it comes to actual sums invested, we are at the bottom with only $3.9 billion. Compare that to Singapore's $63.77 billion, or even the second from the bottom, Vietnam, with $8.9 billion. Last year, FDI inflows surpassed outflows for the first time, with investments reaching $3.8 billion and outflows totaling $3.6 billion. It's clear from those figures that most of the investments coming in are hot money rather than hard investments. Without concrete investments, the Philippines will continue to suffer from unemployment issues.
What people are saying, the BPO sector is our savior industry, no? But if you look at the history of the BPO sector, they've been around for more than a decade, and they've only been able to employ 1 million people. And yet we graduate 2 million people a year. So its absorptive capacity is very limited. Even if you assume an exponential improvement from where we are today, it's not going to be able to absorb our growing manpower, our growing number of graduates.
Former National Economic Development Authority Director Cielito Habitos says that instead of attracting foreign investors to the country, he expects Filipino companies will be the first to take advantage of the ASEAN Economic Community in 2015 by relocating some of their operations to other ASEAN countries because of better access to raw materials and duty-free movement of goods across the ASEAN. Economist June Neri says laws and lack of infrastructure are additional impediments to FDIs.
You have to allow foreigners to come in and be shareholders. And we have a constitution that restricts us from doing that. And again, it goes back to that issue of infrastructure. That's one of the biggest turnoffs for someone who wants to put up a plant here. I cannot deliver my goods because there are simply very limited logistical support.
ASEAN is the largest recipient of FDI relative to GDP. And between 1952 to 2012, Singapore has accounted for more than half the total FDI in the region. Last year, Singapore was the top FDI destination in the region with $63.7 billion, followed by Indonesia with $18.44 billion, Thailand with $12.95 billion, Malaysia with $12.31 billion, and Vietnam with $8.9 billion. Malaysia registered an FDI growth of 19%, Indonesia 17%, Singapore 5%, and Thailand negative 12%. Vietnam had a flattish growth. The World Investment Report for 2014 shows a trend of growing global foreign direct investment flows, which rose by 9% in 2013.
We are service-based and probably will never be seeing as much FDI as the likes of, say, Singapore. But it's also not good to be seeing that productivity is deteriorating in sectors that employ a bigger portion of the population. Agriculture employs about a third of the population, and yet productivity is falling. And which goes back to the problem of inflation. Food price stability is not as good, say, as in Thailand or Vietnam, where improvements in agriculture, productivity in agriculture has actually been improving through time.
What we need are hard investment to sustain the growth here in the economy. And the moment we achieve that, then we can honestly say that we are on the way to becoming an economic tiger.
Growth is expected to continue in the years to come. International investments can spur sustainable development in emerging markets like ours, but hard investments are needed to create jobs, generate exports, and transfer capital and technology to boost development here.